At his retirement dinner, my husband exposing the hidden truth transformed my father's incredible legacy. Mark stood at the front of the room, surrounded by laughter and the warm sense of fresh pastries and coffee wafting through the air. Celebrating his retirement after 30 years climbing the ranks from clerk to respected partner in his Ohio law firm, he beamed with pride, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Tonight, the cheers and accolades would bring more than just applause. They would unveil deeply buried truths waiting to erupt. Emily, his wife, known for her quiet strength, rose to her feet. She cleared her throat, and the ambience shifted sharply. The laughter receded, and a tense silence settled over the gathering as all eyes turned to her. Mark's heartbeat quickened. He sensed something was off. Emily's hands trembled slightly, and as she began to speak, every word was saturated with an emotional weight that hung heavy in the air. She started with a gentle reminiscence of Mark's father, a once revered attorney in a community that had long overlooked him. Describing her husband's father made Mark's throat tighten. Images flooded his mind: the discrimination he faced, the relentless struggles against apathy. As Emily continued, revealing how his father had dedicated his life to elevating marginalized voices, Mark felt the unease wash over him, tinged with embarrassment that quickly morphed into anger. Emily spoke of the invisible scars left on his father's spirit, the countless afternoons Mark had watched him come home exhausted from battles against indifference. The guests leaned in, captivated, while a knot tightened in Mark's stomach. He could hardly breathe, as every detail Emily unfurled began to pry open an internal wound he thought long healed. Here he was, standing in the glow of recognition, when the man who shaped his journey had been overlooked, swallowed by an unjust system. Mark's mind raced, cluttered with questions. Could he accept accolades built on the back of his father's unrecognized sacrifices? It felt painfully contradictory. His success had been woven with the very threads of his father's strength, yet he had been blind to its tangled story. Before he could gather his thoughts, Emily's voice trembled again, now piercing deeper into his consciousness, revealing raw truths that struck like a damning gavel. She conveyed the fatigue etched into his father's features, the grim resolve that never acknowledged defeat, even in the face of condescension. Mark felt torn apart. Would he stand there and bask in the glow of empty accolades? Or should he confront the deep-seated biases that had tainted his own rise? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The tension hung heavily in the air. He glanced at the faces of his former colleagues, men who once scoffed at his father's unconventional methods. They now watched him, curiosity ignited by Emily's revelations. Mark's heart raced, each beat echoing a tumultuous conflict. Loyalty to a father whose legacy had been silenced, and the ambitions he had painstakingly built. Would they applaud him as a hero, knowing he had not fought for the injustices that had stifled his father's voice? As silence enveloped the room again, he felt torn, gripped by the weight of unclaimed truths. Would he let this moment slip away, blending into the comfortable shadows of conformity? Or could he rise, unmask the complicity of a system that had overlooked his father and countless others? His breath stalled in his throat as he caught Emily's fiery gaze, her silent plea urging him to choose the truth. With mounting determination, he stepped toward the podium, feeling the gravity of his choices press like a leaden weight on his shoulders. Time seemed to stall as he prepared to honor his father's sacrifice in front of an audience hanging on his every move, caught at the precipice of destiny. Mark stood at the podium, the eyes of his former colleagues piercing through him, an audience now filled with unspoken expectations. The room felt smaller, the air charged with an electric pulse that matched the cadence of his racing heart. He opened his mouth, but words eluded him. Instead, he inhaled deeply, allowing the heaviness of the moment to ground him in reality. "Thank you, Emily," he finally managed, his voice cracking slightly. "Thank you for sharing my father's story." The initial gratitude felt overshadowed by a tidal wave of recognition of what lay beneath the surface. Fragile emotions swirled in him, reminding him of his father's commitment and the neglect it had endured. We often forget the sacrifices that shape our successes. My father's journey is one laden with uncelebrated victories, countless battles against a system that failed him. Mark hesitated, grappling with the inherent complexities of embracing this newfound truth. Could he do justice to the silent sacrifices of a man who fought for a world his son thrived in? The fear of exposing the hidden truths gnawed at him. The legacy he enjoyed was not his alone. His gaze swept the room, absorbing the expressions etched on faces that had previously dismissed his father's struggles. He sensed an awakening among them, curiosity morphing into discomfort. And just like that, an idea ignited within him. This could be a pivotal moment not just for himself but for every person who had witnessed that invisible battle. The legacy of my father is not merely a story of hardship, it's a testament to resilience and the unwavering fight against injustice, he continued, his voice gaining strength. While I've stood here celebrated, many have been left in the shadows, their voices unheard. We owe it to those voices to bring light to their struggles. The words spilled forth, a cascade of emotions trapping every guest in a web of reflection. Mark's mind ignited with a growing sense of purpose. He wouldn't merely accept the accolades. He would seek to redefine them. This was more than a retirement speech, this was the beginning of a dialogue that needed to happen. A reckoning of the silenced truths that had shaped his journey. Suddenly, a flash of doubt crept in. Was he equipped to initiate this change? The path to reformation was fraught with challenges, perilous in its complexity. Nevertheless, the burning desire to confront systemic injustices grew beyond mere inspiration. He envisioned a future where his father's mission could be embraced, where marginalized voices would not be buried under professional accolades. Mark's pulse quickened as he navigated through this newfound awareness. Speaking truthfully held power not just for him, but for an entire community yearning for recognition. The audience remained rooted, rapt, absorbing his words like a lifeline. He glanced over at Emily, a reassuring warmth flickering in her eyes, fanning the flames of his resolve. What if we, as a profession, acknowledge the contribution of those we've overlooked? What if we rallied behind the stories of those who came before us? Together, let us ensure our legacies forge pathways, not veils of silence, he urged. A fervent plea resonating from his depths, an invigorating swell of courage consumed him. He was on the brink of unearthing a purpose lost in the socio-professional limbo, a role beyond recognition that could lead to advocacy. Yet curiosity lingered, entwined with the dawning awareness of his own limitations. How would he begin to approach this task? As the room erupted into an applause that felt both foreign and exhilarating, Mark locked eyes with Emily, brimming with pride and belief in his direction. Their journey had taken an unexpected turn, one that demanded more from him than he had anticipated. Would he be willing to persevere down this newly lit path and confront the complexities it would unveil? In that moment of shared hope and precarious anticipation, Mark resolved to advocate for his father's legacy, but uncertainty loomed regarding the resistance he might face. The night held a promise, a beginning, but also a shadow of doubt that trailed behind him. With the echoes of applause still resonating, he wondered, who would stand with him in confronting the truths yet to be uncovered? Mark stepped off the podium, his heart still racing, the applause reverberating in his ears like a war drum echoing a call to arms. As he walked past familiar faces, once colleagues, now something akin to allies in a shared introspection, he felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It was as though their collective energy had rearranged itself, positioning him at the center of an unfolding narrative that demanded more than mere words. Emily approached him, her expression a fusion of admiration and expectation. That was powerful, Mark. Truly. But what's next? Her question hung in the air, amplifying the gravity of the moment. While he was aware of the impact his words had made, an unsettling thought gnawed at him. What if the momentum fizzled out? What if his newfound resolve to honor his father's legacy was merely an ember fading in the wind? I think I need to start connecting with people who share this vision, he replied thoughtfully, momentarily taking shelter in the clarity of the plan. There are so many stories untold, so much potential for change if we can rally together. Each word felt heavier than the last, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like an unfamiliar cloak. Then make the connections, Emily urged. You're in a unique position to leverage this moment. Don't let it slip away. Her encouragement pierced through his lingering doubt. He pondered the countless individuals he had encountered, those whose lives paralleled his father's tales of struggle entwined with aspiration, voices woven into the fabric of an overlooked existence. Suddenly, a realization jolted him. Mark had spent years embedded in a system that thrived on suppression. Yet here he was, on the cusp of something transformative, a bridge between acknowledgement and action. He could initiate that discourse he'd alluded to, shining a spotlight on the forgotten and marginalized. Right, he nodded, a flicker of resolve igniting within him again. I'll start by reaching out to nonprofits focused on advocacy, local community leaders, and anyone who has felt the weight of systemic barriers. There's power in collaboration. The swell of determination settled in his chest, invigorating his spirit. Mark envisioned a series of workshops or forums where experiences could be shared, where collaborative dialogues could cultivate understanding and empathy. Could this be the platform where collective suffering shifted toward collective hope? Yet doubt introduced a new narrative. What if they dismissed him as a privileged voice? Would he be viewed as an outsider attempting to rewrite shared experiences, commodifying pain in the name of advocacy? The pang of these considerations tethered him briefly to the ground. He realized that authenticity was crucial. He would need to approach each conversation with vulnerability and openness, grounding himself in the truth of his own journey. What if I share my father's story further? Make it a central narrative. He turned back to Emily, half excited, half nervous. I could integrate it into these discussions, not just a monologue but as a catalyst for discourse. This thought took root inside him, sprouting questions how to frame his father's story in a way that invited engagement rather than judgment. As they continued conversing, Mark felt a tugging at the back of his mind. Each step down this tightrope of intention led him to question his preparedness for such an endeavor. Would navigating this complex landscape expose him to attacks on his integrity, aimed at dismantling his newfound purpose? The uncertainty loomed larger as possibilities for both allyship and criticism danced tantalizingly above him. He recognized it was one thing to share his story. It was another to advocate for change, daring to confront uncomfortable truths. I can do this, he proclaimed softly, a mantra taking shape. The world might resist him, but he owed it to his father's legacy and to the voices that had long been silenced to at least try. With a newfound clarity, he glanced at Emily, their previous conversation framing a collective mission. There were bridges to build, stories to untangle, and a complex path to tread. The question now loomed like a beckoning shadow. Would he have the courage to chart this territory and confront whoever stood in his way? In the days that followed the impassioned speech, Mark threw himself into research, combing through reports and success stories of grassroots initiatives, taking notes until the ink smeared on the pages. This was not merely a project, it was personal. Each statistic he encountered became a reminder of his father's struggles. As impactful as a photograph stirring memories locked away, it fueled his desire to uncover the hidden narratives begging to be brought into the light. He began drafting emails, weaving together a narrative that was both compelling and authentic. The initial drafts played with words like a musician experimenting with melodies, searching for the right tone to resonate with others. His intention was not to patronize but to connect, to stand alongside rather than ahead of those whose stories had long been entangled in silence. Yet, as he sat before his laptop, a new discomfort settled in. What if they didn't respond? Would his carefully crafted words land in dusty inboxes, overlooked like the stories he sought to champion? For each heroic narrative, there was an equal weight of rejection pulling at his confidence. With a deep breath, he pressed send, a leap into a chasm marked by uncertainty and hope. Over the next few weeks, a flurry of responses trickled in. Some were appreciative, others hesitant, asking for more clarity around his intentions. But it was one email that ignited a deeper urgency within him. A local nonprofit director invited him to their next meeting. As he read the message, his heart raced. This was his chance to transform intention into action. Yet a part of him recoiled. Who was he to step into a room filled with voices that had actually lived through the struggles he yearned to address? The night prior to the meeting was restless. Mark found himself pacing, rehearsing his thoughts, eyeing the mirror as if it were a battle flag. How to articulate the importance of shared narratives without reducing them to mere anecdotes? How could he display vulnerability without exposing himself to critique? The complexity of his task turned every thought into a painful not the meeting. The room radiated a charged energy, voices sharing experiences etched with resilience. Mark observed, initially an outsider, processing anecdotes that resonated far greater than he'd anticipated. Each struggle shared, each critique levied against systemic failures, echoed the weight of his father's life, the struggles, the triumphs, and especially the quiet perseverance when his turn finally came. He glanced around at the expectant faces. The weight of his father's story loomed larger than life, demanding respect and reciprocity. "I'm here to share my father's journey," he began, the tremor in his voice resolute. He spoke not just of facts but of emotions, the fear and the yearning, allowing the edges of vulnerability to intersect with passion. His words drew the attention of several attendees, some nodding, others placing their hands over their hearts, as they absorbed the essence of his narrative. When he concluded, a devastating silence followed. Then, a woman spoke up, a social worker revealing her own experiences paralleling his father's. "Your father's story should not only live in memory but inspire action. How can we help make that happen?" In her question lay the realization of his role. He held a lifeline to narratives long suppressed, a connector between his father's legacy and a community hungry for change. But would he be able to wield this power responsibly? As conversations ensued, fueled by ideas and passion, Mark felt the initial tendrils of doubt creeping back. What if he overstepped? What if his presence overshadowed those who had always deserved the spotlight? The anxiety unfurled inside his gut, a stark reminder that not all voices would resonate with acceptance. Amid this turmoil, an unexpected voice rose above the others, silencing the room. A veteran activist named James challenged Mark directly. "You may have the best of intentions, but how are you navigating this space? Are you here to speak for us or to amplify?" The question pierced through his urgency, unraveling the carefully woven fabric of his ambition, leaving him exposed. Could he truly navigate this expanding landscape without erasing the very narratives he sought to elevate? Stripped of the safety of intention, Mark found himself at a precipice. The crossroads demanding not only his authenticity but a clear strategy for genuine allyship. With every ounce of sincerity, he realized the next steps would require unwavering self-examination, a steadfast commitment to listen before leading. The call for true engagement echoed in his mind, prompting a crucial internal dialogue. Was he ready to confront the complexities of this journey, where the impact of his words could either uplift or diminish? As he contemplated the emerging path, a clear moment crystallized, a visceral urge to understand the implications of his newfound ambition. Courage, he understood, would not only be about advocating for change but about being willing to be vulnerable, to answer the hard questions. The next meeting loomed, but one thing was certain: he could no longer afford to simply stand on the sidelines or let others define the discourse. The time had come to face his own motivations, confront hidden fears, and honestly assess whether he truly had the courage to be a conduit for change, or simply an echo of others' voices. The question lingered as he exited that gathering, pulling at him with relentless urgency. Would he have the strength to reveal his own truth even as he sought to champion others? The days leading up to the next meeting were a blur of conflicting emotions. Mark found himself deep in thought, each moment reprising the echoes of James's question. His desire to uplift those unheard clashed with an unsettling sense of responsibility. What emboldened him to take this role? To position himself as an advocate for voices he didn't own. He began digging deeper into the art of allyship. Books filled with statistics and theories adorned his desk, but the more he read, the clearer it became. Concepts were only vibrant when matched with emotional truth. He needed to forge a genuine connection with those he wanted to help, to immerse himself in their experiences, to understand their perspectives beyond academic study. Mark reached out to some of the attendees from the previous meeting, expressing his eagerness to learn. Over coffee and casual conversations, he noticed the nuances often lost in formal dialogues. Personal stories wove through the fabric of policy and statistics, illustrating the stark realities that figures alone could never encapsulate. He began to see how his father's story was one among many, a thread in a larger tapestry of struggle, resilience, and hope. Amid these self-discoveries, a nagging self-doubt resurfaced. Would the community accept him as a collaborator, or would they see a pretender? His carefully crafted facade felt thinner with each exchanged narrative. The contrast between his background and those he wished to support amplified his feelings of vulnerability. He even considered withdrawing from the upcoming meeting, fearing he would tarnish the voices he sought to empower. Yet, retreating felt like a backward step and act against the very ideals he wanted to uphold. Mark decided to shift his approach. Instead of presenting himself as the one who needed to advocate, he aimed to enter the next gathering as an eager learner, a collaborator ready to amplify the stories that mattered. He drafted a new statement, one that opened the floor for dialogue, rather than overshadowing it. The mantra anchored in his mind became "listen first, lead later," a reminder to give others the space to shape the conversation. As he prepared, he practiced the art of vulnerability. It wouldn't be a rehearsed speech but a genuine conversation, one rooted in shared experiences and mutual respect. The goal was to acknowledge his father's journey, while recognizing there were countless others waiting for the same spotlight. When the day of the meeting arrived, a wave of nervous energy surged through him. Walking into the room, he looked around at the familiar faces. There was a palpable tension in the air, but also an undercurrent of unity and purpose. Mark reminded himself of what he learned from previous interactions. This gathering wasn't solely about him, but about collective stories that needed to be told. He listened intently, losing himself in the anecdotes shared by others. A young woman spoke of her family's struggles with healthcare, while a man recounted the community push against unjust zoning laws. Each narrative added another dimension to the conversations swirling in the room. When his turn arrived, it felt less like a presentation and more like an invitation to share his truth. "I'm here not to speak for anyone, but to uncover my father's memories and connect with others who've navigated similar paths," he began. "I recognize that my understanding is limited, and my intention is neither to overshadow nor to simplify anyone's experiences." There were nods of acknowledgement, eyes that sparkled with attentiveness. The narrative Mark presented was his first stepping stone and entry point into a broader dialogue. However, an urgency flickered as another voice interrupted. It was James challenging him once more. "You say you're here to learn, but what will you do with that knowledge?" The question pierced Mark's heart. This time the stakes felt higher. He had embraced vulnerability, yet the next step demanded a plan, a commitment to action beyond mere storytelling. What would advocacy look like for him, and could he ensure it remained genuine amidst his ambitions? The question ricocheted in his mind even as he engaged with others. Discussions grew louder, pregnant with ideas. Mark felt alive, yet plagued by doubt as he acknowledged the complexity of his role. The line between empowerment and appropriation blurred more than ever. Each interaction tested him, forcing him to confront how he could actively contribute. As the meeting drew to a close, Mark's determination ignited anew. It was clear he could no longer merely listen. He had to become a bridge for action. But how would he wield that influence without overshadowing the distinct narratives of those he aimed to uplift? As he contemplated his next steps, the realization settled heavily on him. He needed to define his purpose, to navigate the thin line between advocacy and empowerment. The question loomed larger than before. Could he embrace the challenge of being an ally while staying true to his vision? The air crackled with potential and uncertainty, preparing him for an inevitable confrontation with the very ambitions that fueled his desire for change. He left that meeting inspired, yet deeply aware that the real test lay ahead. The moment he had to choose between standing out or holding the space for others to shine. The following week felt like a whirlwind of uncertainty for Mark. He found himself replaying conversations in his mind, contemplating every nuance, every potential misstep. His initial exhilaration from the meeting gradually morphed into anxiety. The question James had posed rang louder each day. What would he do with the knowledge he had gained? The enormity of that inquiry began to consume his thoughts. Even as he sought clarity to combat this overwhelming feeling, Mark started a journal. Writing down his reflections allowed him to sift through ideas and summon his thoughts into something tangible. For every moment of doubt he documented, he contrasted it with a realization and insight gleaned from conversations or readings. This exercise transformed confusion into a narrative of growth, one where he could examine his motivations and beliefs without judgment. Yet, the more he wrote, the more he recognized a gap he needed to bridge. Understanding didn't suffice. Action was essential. He could no longer hover on the periphery, yearning for involvement while remaining passive. Mark needed a method to translate his experiences into concrete contributions. One evening, his phone buzzed with a notification. A group message from the attendees of the recent meeting had landed in his inbox. They were organizing another round of discussions, but this time it was more focused, expanding on how advocacy could be implemented in specific projects. Instinctively, a wave of dread washed over him. What could he possibly contribute? Despite his trepidation, he saw an opportunity to address the confusion that clouded his path. Mark took a deep breath and typed out a message, introducing himself as someone committed to understanding and supporting their initiatives. His heart raced as he hit send, but an innate drive pushed him forward. He was ready to claim his seat at the table, albeit acknowledging the limitations he faced. The response was swift, filled with warmth and encouragement. He felt buoyed by their enthusiasm, and for the first time, the prospect of participating in discussions about tangible actions felt invigorating rather than intimidating. On the day of the meeting, he walked into the space with a different perspective. Instead of fixating on his self-doubt, he chose to focus on listening and learning, absorbing the diverse viewpoints around him. The room was alive with energy. Everyone discussed potential projects and strategies. Mark recognized the vibrant dialogues were not just about concepts but about real lives affected by the issues at hand. As ideas flourished, he found himself contributing more than he had anticipated. His background in marketing emerged as a surprise asset. He began mapping how to elevate these narratives to broader audiences, coupling storytelling with strategic approaches to advocacy. In sharing this insight, he watched as faces around him lit up with acknowledgement. However, just as he began to feel a sense of belonging, James's voice echoed cautiously across the room. "Mark, how do you propose to navigate the balance? We appreciate ideas, but without intention they're just chatter." The question, while familiar, struck him with renewed intensity. It demanded not just a plan, but a commitment to the kind of action that would respect the very individuals he sought to support. This wasn't merely about tactical strategies. It was about wielding his influence while ensuring he uplifted rather than overshadowed. Mark's confidence faltered for a moment. He realized he needed to articulate his vision, to anchor his ideas in a coherent statement of purpose, something that reflected not just his ambition but the intricate themes of collaboration and respect he had learned. He wrestled with what he could genuinely promise, contemplating how transparency could become his anchor. As the group discussion continued, he felt an urgent call to respond not with defensive platitudes, but with a crystallized purpose. He took a breath again, knowing the moment required clarity. "James, you're right. It's not enough to propose ideas. I want to ensure that any action I support centers on those directly affected. I'll commit to sharing decision-making power and amplifying the voices that matter most in these narratives," he declared, the words flowing from a newfound commitment. The response was mixed. Some nodded appreciatively while others questioned how he would hold true to that promise in practice. An ember of doubt sparked anew within him. Had he overstepped? He realized there was still much uncertainty obscuring his journey. He had taken a step forward, yet clarity remained elusive. What next? How would he navigate the challenges ahead without compromising the integrity of the advocacy he sought to support? Mark left that meeting with a clearer purpose, but the stakes had shifted. Alongside this newfound determination, a profound uncertainty loomed. Could he commit to not just advocacy but a path of authentic partnership with the very voices he aimed to elevate? As he walked home deliberating over his next move, the question turned introspective. What did true collaboration require from someone still grappling with his own role in this complex narrative? The tension hung heavily in the air, promising that his journey was far from complete. Mark returned home that evening, the lingering tension from the meeting threading its way through his mind. He had taken a step, yes, but it felt like a leap into an abyss. The clarity he sought still eluded him. His promise echoed insistently. He paced the floor, scratching a pen across the pages of his journal, an impulsive attempt to quell the turmoil within. What was he truly asking of himself? Partnership was a lofty goal. An invitation to share not just ideas but power, influence, and responsibility. Would he be able to embody the respect he claimed to foster? That moment of conviction in the meeting had felt empowering, yet now he grappled with fear. Fear of failing those he aimed to support and of failing himself. The following days emerged as a mixed bag of determination and uncertainty. Mark committed to a rigorous schedule, devoting time daily to understanding the nuances of the issues at play. Research became both sanctuary and prison. He immersed himself in articles, reports, and interviews, seeking voices that represented lived experiences. Each piece of information sharpened his awareness but also heightened his sense of inadequacy. How could he distill so many complexities into actionable steps? Still, he persisted. His evenings filled with notes as he crafted a framework for advocacy, testing the language he would use to reach out to stakeholders, community leaders, and those directly affected. Not just a process of writing, but a deliberate effort to find the right words that would bridge the gap between intent and impact. Mark began to see his background in marketing as a tool, a means to amplify those voices instead of silencing them. But with this new clarity came moral dilemmas that knotted his stomach. The more he learned, the more he faced questions about his privilege. Did he have any right to take the lead? What would give him the authority to speak on issues that weren't his? With every revelation, guilt arose. Could his voice be another layer of suppression? At the end of another long day, he decided to reach out to James, hoping for validation. Perhaps sharing his thoughts would help solidify his understanding of what he was trying to achieve. As he typed his message, he felt exposed, revealing his vulnerabilities alongside his ambitions. James, I've been reflecting on our discussions and the commitments I made. I want to navigate this responsibly, but I'm struggling with what it means to genuinely empower others while also leading. How do I ensure my actions reflect those values? The response came quickly. James expressed appreciation for Mark's introspection and suggested they connect over coffee to talk through these concerns. Mark felt an odd mixture of relief and anxiety. This wasn't merely about asking for advice. It was about confronting his fears in a more personal setting. As the day of their coffee meeting approached, he rehearsed the conversation in his mind. Would James challenge him? Would he hold Mark to his own words? When they met at the small cafe bustling with chatter, Mark felt the electric buzz of anticipation combined with a sense of impending confrontation. James greeted him warmly, but the weight of their last encounter loomed large. "What's on your mind?" James asked, and for a moment Mark was paralyzed. Should he articulate his concerns or mask them? "I want to make sure that I'm not just participating," he began while tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "I want to ensure that any contribution of mine enhances others, and I'm worried that my background might overshadow what I aim to support." As he spoke, the floodgates of introspection opened wide. Every sentence revealed a conflict between his aspirations and his insecurities. James listened intently, and as their conversation unfolded, an unexpected clarity emerged. Mark began to realize that true partnership was not defined solely by authority, but by the shared journey of learning and embracing vulnerability. "This process is about evolution," James said thoughtfully. "True collaboration often requires discomfort, and it seems you're already aware of that. Embrace it." The words resonated deeply. Mark felt the steadfast currents of determination swell within him. He was committed not just to outreach but to establishing a platform for others where his role was supportive, not dominating. Yet, as they closed their discussion, James presented a question that shifted the ground beneath him again. "So, how do you plan to confront the very instincts that tell you to pull back? How will you maintain that commitment amidst inevitable challenges?" Mark's stomach churned and unease shadowed his thoughts. Maintaining integrity, what would that actually require? Could he hold steadfast when faced with difficulties or pressure? This prospect nudged him back into a familiar spiral of uncertainty. As he walked home, a mixture of excitement and trepidation filled him, forcing him to confront the reality that the path to true impact was far from straightforward. What exactly waited at the crossroads of ambition and humility? The answer felt tantalizingly close yet infinitely distant, leaving him grappling with what he had just learned. That acceptance of discomfort might be essential for the journey into true partnership. What tumultuous revelations lay ahead in this unfolding story? The days after his meeting with James turned into a delicate balancing act for Mark. Each morning greeted him with renewed ambition, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, the burdens of doubt returned. He found solace in his notebook, where thoughts flowed chaotically onto the pages, forcing him to confront the uncertainty that clung to him like a shadow. He began each day meticulously mapping out tasks, researching advocacy frameworks, engaging in discussions with peers, and even daring to reach out to activists whose work challenged his preconceptions. Yet with each connection made, layers of anxiety peeled back to reveal the raw skin of his insecurities. Why did he feel like an interloper in spaces that should be vibrant with diverse voices? On a particularly overcast afternoon, while huddled in a corner of the cafe that had become his second home, he happened to overhear a group of individuals animatedly debating local issues. They spoke with an authenticity that both captivated and frightened him. His instinct urged him to join, to contribute, but a quiet voice taunted, reminding him of the privilege that bore down on his shoulders. What could he add that wouldn't he echo back as an insult to the hard-earned wisdom reflected in their words? What should have been a moment of inspiration felt instead like a chasm growing wider. He wanted to be a conduit for change, but was he destined to remain a mere spectator? When Mark returned home that night, the emotional turbulence coiled tightly around his heart. The questions that had simmered beneath his skin surged forth, demanding answers. How could he craft a narrative that would honor the stories of others, while being aware of his place within the broader context? He turned to his journal, determined to capture the questioning. The pen became an extension of his vulnerability, arching across the paper as he wrote about his fears, the weight of his experience, and the fight to remain humble in the face of ambition. Yet, each reflection echoed the same underlying truth. The pursuit of authenticity in his role demanded a reckoning with both his strengths and shortcomings. Days turned into weeks, and with every dip into the complexities surrounding community needs and advocacy, the growing sense of self-awareness came with unexpected clarity. He began to recognize his unique insights drawn from his background in marketing and business. Rather than viewing his skills as tools of domination, he reframed them as opportunities to elevate voices that often went unheard. Yet even as this realization sparked hope, it was accompanied by a tightening knot in his stomach. Could he confidently step forward and assert his presence in spaces filled with those who had been silenced? He reached out again to James, hoping to transform this turbulent journey into a constructive dialogue. "I think I've been approaching this all wrong," he texted, his breath hitching as he reflected on the weight of his words. "I'm starting to see that my experiences can be part of the solution if I let go of the insecurities that plague me. But can I truly be effective without overshadowing those I wish to support?" The anticipation of another coffee meeting filled him with both dread and a twinge of excitement. Mark was now standing at a precipice, one that demanded an honest introspection of his evolving identity. As he approached their next rendezvous, he imagined the courage it would take to share this revelation, to reveal not just the clarity he had found, but also the fears that still haunted him. Would James see his potential or merely the stumbling blocks? Just as doubt began to creep in, a stronger voice rose within him, bolstered by the resilience he had nurtured in pursuit of understanding. He stepped inside the cafe, the ambience shifting from chaotic noise to focused whispers as he sought out his mentor. Here, commitment mingled with the palpable tension of possibility, but what awaited him in this conversation was uncertain. How would James respond to his burgeoning acceptance of his role? In that moment, the chasm of doubt felt both daunting and promising, a defining point on Mark's journey toward relevant participation. Would this exchange reveal the foundation he could build on, or would it echo old fears that still refrained from resolution? The clock ticked menacingly as he and James began to engage. The cafe buzzed with a blend of chatter and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee, but Mark's focus narrowed as he approached James. His heart pounded, a relentless rhythm against the wave of anxious thoughts threatening to drown him. What if James dismissed his ideas? No, he pushed that thought aside. This was his moment, the crucible in which his resolve would be tested. James sat at a small table, his expression neutral yet inviting. Mark slid into the seat opposite him, reworking his mental script as he grappled with the duality of vulnerability and strength. "Thank you for meeting with me again," he started, the words tasting both foreign and necessary. "Of course, Mark. I'm eager to hear your thoughts," James replied. His calm demeanor offered a semblance of reassurance, yet Mark felt an irrefutable weight on his shoulders. He took a deep breath, grounding himself. "I've realized I've been holding back because I was unsure of how my background fits into this work. I see value in my experience, but I still fear that I lack authenticity compared to those who have lived the issues I want to address." His voice wavered slightly, the fear surfacing like a bubbling volcano ready to erupt. Authenticity isn't about matching experiences, but rather about being honest with your journey, James countered. What you bring is unique, and denying that only creates a larger chasm. Mark absorbed those words, feeling them resonate deeply as they settled against his insecurities. They dove into a discussion of strategies, weaving in the threads of marketing insights with the strategies James offered from his activism experience. Each point of dialogue pushed Mark further into the realization that he could use his skills not as a weapon but as a bridge. He envisioned campaigns that highlighted the voices of those affected directly, still tinged with a concern that maybe he would falter in execution. What if I misrepresent someone's story? Or if my approach doesn't resonate and it backfires? Mark voiced, his brow furrowed. The shadows of self-doubt crept in, lingering and potent. James leaned in, his gaze steady and unwavering. What if it succeeds? What if you inspire a shift or bring a solution where there was none before? Embrace your fear. It's a sign that you're on the edge of growth. Rely on your network and listen. With every piece of advice James offered, Mark could feel the claustrophobic weight of his apprehension loosen its grip. You're right, I need to learn how to navigate these spaces. I can't just step back in fear. Saying that out loud, he felt the truth take form. As their meeting progressed, Mark began brainstorming ways to integrate his marketing skills into outreach efforts. He visualized campaigns meticulously crafted to amplify voices, rather than overshadow them. The tension in his chest started to fade, replaced by a flickering flame of determination. That's it. If I can manage the narrative, I can create avenues for others to contribute without feeling like an intruder, he articulated. With newfound clarity, he grasped the realization that once he framed his role as that of a collaborator, rather than a conqueror, he could truly make an impact. The conversation transitioned into practical strategies outreach, social media engagement, and storytelling workshops. As they spoke, Mark felt his confidence climb. He was no longer an abstract observer, but a burgeoning participant ready to actively shape his path forward. But just as excitement bubbled within him, a new worry emerged. How would those he hoped to uplift receive his efforts? Did they even want him there? The prospect of potential rejection loomed large, souring his thoughts momentarily. I appreciate our discussion today, but there's still a piece of me that hesitates, Mark confessed, acknowledging the fear that still lingered at the edges of his mind. Remember, Mark, James replied, leaning back slightly, growth often feels uncomfortable. The real challenge will be accepting that discomfort and using it to fuel your progress. You may not have all the answers now, but that's part of the journey. With their dialogue winding down, Mark's resolve solidified. He realized this was but one step on a longer path of discovery, one rife with chances to confront not only his uncertainties, but also his potential. Stepping outside the cafe, he inhaled sharply, the crisp air filling his lungs with a renewed sense of purpose. But just as he turned to leave, a lingering doubt whispered sweetly, what if he could never fully step into the role he envisioned? The vibrancy of possibility clashed with the caution of fear, and as Mark pondered what awaited him in this newfound territory, he knew the real confrontation had just begun. How would he tackle the inevitable challenges faced when intentions meet reality? The steps ahead felt daunting, but there was no turning back now. The journey toward change had only just begun. Months passed, but the tension between the aspirations Mark held and the realities of his own insecurities remained palpable. Yet he found himself forging ahead, stepping into a role that demanded both commitment and humility. By accepting collaboration as a cornerstone of his efforts, he brought authenticity to the forefront of his mission. The first significant milestone came when Mark partnered with the local nonprofit James had suggested. Together, they launched a series of storytelling workshops aimed at unearthing the narratives of those who had long been silenced. With his marketing skills and newfound understanding of the importance of representation, Mark began crafting these sessions into platforms for sharing experiences. Each workshop was a revelation. Participants shared raw, poignant stories, illuminating the harsh realities that lay hidden beneath societal norms. Mark learned to facilitate discussions that invited vulnerability, urging individuals to voice their truths while he remained in the background, giving them space to shine. The transformative moments became the new foundation for the community, instilling a collective spirit of strength that washed over him like a release. And one unforgettable session, a young woman recounted her experience navigating systemic barriers in healthcare. Her bravery sparked a powerful dialogue within the group, eliciting not just empathy but active dialogues about tangible solutions. Mark felt the power of that moment settle in. He had deemed his past experiences capable of solidarity and significance, not overshadowing the stories being told but amplifying them. One evening, as he reflected on the success of the workshops, he gazed at the burgeoning community that had formed. The faces around him, once strangers, now mirrored the resilience he sought to foster, people who had chosen to share their struggles, morphing their narratives from isolation to coalition. It became clear to him that advocacy was not just an extension of his previous ambitions. It demanded devotion to a purpose greater than himself. The next step came when Mark initiated dialogues with local leaders and activists. He wasn't just seeking endorsement. He aimed to create invitations for others to join the endeavor. Shaping the narrative toward change involved actively listening, welcoming diverse perspectives into the fold. Then came the moment of recognition that tested everything he had built. At a community event showcasing collaborative projects, an award was presented for outstanding community impact. To his astonishment, Mark received the honor for his contributions through the workshops and advocacy efforts. The room erupted into applause, a moment bursting with the validation he had sought, yet he stood unsure of how to feel. Stepping forward to accept the award, he felt the weight of words tumbling around in his mind. Instead of tracing the familiar path of self-congratulation, he knew his speech had to pivot toward the collective movement birthed from shared experiences. The spotlight had shifted from him to the community. This wasn't just his moment. Thank you for this recognition, but I must emphasize this is not just about one person's journey, he began. It reflects the powerful narratives of many who have come together to shine light on issues often left in the dark. Mark's voice grew steadier as he honored the insights shared within the workshops, insisting that the strength witnessed in the community was born from their courage to confront uncomfortable truths. In that moment, a profound calm washed over him. Mark realized he had transcended both praise and fear. He had cultivated meaningful connections born from sincerity. As he looked out at the audience, the hesitance of the past melted into a solid confidence. Their purpose was shared, the acknowledgement of struggles tethered them to an incredible legacy of collaboration that would flourish beyond the walls of recognition. The rush of fulfillment came full circle when he returned home that night. No longer did doubt perch heavily on his shoulders. Instead, he reveled in the recognition that true advocacy flowed from vulnerability, respect, and collective empowerment. This moment became the cornerstone of his commitment, a promise etched into the fabric of his exploration, illustrating the importance of lifting others while affirming one's own voice. And so what was once merely a facade of ambition transformed into a vibrant reality marked by purpose. Mark had achieved not just individual recognition but a deeper, lasting commitment to a cause far greater than himself, a reflection of his father's legacy, reborn in a chorus of shared stories. Embrace your own journey, challenge the fears that bind you, and take an active role in narratives begging to be heard. Every action sparks change. Your story is part of a much larger tapestry. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share.